of Santa Barbara Finance Committee meeting of July 14th, 2009. With me today is Councilmember Falcone and Councilmember Schneider. I'm Roger Horton, Chair of the committee. Today we will discuss the City of Santa Barbara investment policy for revisions for fiscal year 2010 and loans for affordable housing at 416 to 424 East Coda Street. Mr. Pearson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Bob Pearson, Finance Director. And as you said, Mr. Chair, the first item today is the annual review and readoption of the city's investment policy. Jill Tarr is going to be making the bulk of the presentation today. I'm going to have a small piece of it, but this is on your agenda today, and then with your concurrence and support, if that's where we end up today, it will be on the City Council's consent agenda for next week. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jill, and she can make some introductory comments.
Thank you, Bob. Good afternoon, Chair Horton and committee members. I'm Jill Tarr, Treasury Manager, and I'm here to present a review of the 2010 proposed Statement of Investment Policy. With your review and approval, as Bob mentioned, it will be forwarded to Council next week, at which time Council will formally adopt the policy, as well as, under separate action, delegate investment authority to staff, the investment authority that is outlined in the city charter. Annually, staff prepares an statement of investment policy that's adopted, and while no longer required under state law, staff continues to believe it's prudent to bring this to Council for adoption for setting standards for effective management of the city and redevelopment assets, as well as providing clear guidance to staff on daily investment activities. The proposed statement before you conforms to the highest standards of excellence, including CDAC standards, and has been recognized nationally with several awards. CDAC, of course, being the California Debt and Investment Advisory Committee. And with that, I'd like to turn it back to Bob Pearson to talk about the general outline of the policy.
Thank you, Jill. The annual investment policy, really from an overview perspective, it establishes the types of investments in which the city can put its temporarily idle cash, and it also sets forth the procedures that we will use, who will be in charge of investment authority, and the like. Probably the most important piece is that it defines the permitted investments. And obviously, the investment policy is established under the state government code, which governs all public investment activities. And our investment policy obviously complies with the state investing code. And in fact, as Jill will mention, in some cases, our policy is actually more restrictive than the state code. So it defines the permitted investments, and just sort of, as I know you know, but maybe the audience, to remind them that under state investment code, we are only allowed to invest in fixed income securities, that is bonds. We cannot invest in stocks or real estate or futures or options or anything, simply bonds, fixed income. And we are also limited, with certain very limited exceptions, to a term to maturity of 5 years. So all the bonds that we buy have to mature, reach their final maturity in 5 years or less from the date we buy them. And that's to protect the city from the interest rate swings that can affect the value of of investments. Obviously, the longer out you go, the more affected you are by change. The value of those investments can be by changes in interest rates. The policy also establishes the general investment objectives as well as the parameters that enforce diversification and, as I just mentioned, the average maturity of the portfolio. It delegates the investment authority from the City Council to the City Administrator, and then also from the City Administrator to the Finance Director. And then it even mentions that the day-to-day management of the portfolio is under the direction of the Treasury Manager, under the supervision of the Finance Director. It contains standards for prudent investing, ethics, and internal controls, and it reduces exposure to liability for the City Council officers and staff in regards to managing the city's investment portfolio by establishing these parameters within which we are bound to work. And it does provide flexibility to accommodate changes in either the state government code governing public investments or other accounting or financial management pronouncements, for instance, by the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. So that's really the big picture of why we have an investment policy, why we think it's prudent, and why we bring it to you every year to update it and to ask Council to redelegate each year the investment authority. And with that, I'll turn it back to Jill.
The policy itself begins with a mission statement, which states to invest public funds in a manner that will provide maximum security, adequate liquidity, and sufficient yield, while meeting the daily cash flow demands of the city and conforming to all statutes and regulations governing the investment of public funds. And the remainder of the policy sets forth the specific steps, requirements, and guidelines in order to achieve this mission. The policy starts by talking about investment objectives and clearly defines these three objectives in priority order, the first of which being security, which is preservation of the principal in the overall portfolio through diversification. This is accomplished in two ways: by mitigating credit risk, by limiting our investments to the safest types of securities, pre-qualifying all financial institutions, brokers, dealers, and advisors that the city does business with in managing the portfolio, as well as diversifying the portfolio to minimize the risk of any one asset class, minimize the risk that any one asset class
Jill,
could
a question
have.
on that. In the pre-qualification issue, are many local agencies qualified? How does that work out for us?
We have 5 brokers that we deal with, and I don't believe any of them are local. We deal with Citibank, Union Bank. Bob, did you want to add?
Yeah, if I might. Thank you, Jill. Part of it is that we deal with primary dealers, and really we do go through a qualification process. We have 5, as Jill mentioned. I think that in looking at it right now, if we had it to do over again, we probably only want 4, because you want enough to keep competition up, but you also want a few enough number that they get a meaningful amount of business for you so that you retain their interest. And I think sometimes with our 5, we don't always get to give them enough business to really keep them on their toes for us. But the primary dealer is the issue that we really need to be dealing with primary dealers. And so we're dealing with large institutional desks that specialize in public agency investing. These are desks that they're not dealing with retail investors. These are institutional desks that deal specifically and exclusively with public agencies.
Well, were any of these desks impacted by the recent financial meltdown?
No, they have not been. As far as we're concerned, we always invest on what's called DVP, which is delivery versus payment. We use a trustee, which in our case is the Trust Department of Santa Barbara Bank and Trust. They execute our trades, and the money is transferred to the broker-dealer in the same instant electronically that the security is transferred to Santa Barbara Bank and Trust Department. And so really we don't have to worry about that, because these pieces are being sold to us, and when the payment is being made simultaneously with the receipt of the security. So we've not had any issues with any of our brokers.
So in that it's a simultaneous transaction and there's no lag time for any of the numbers to change, that's why there's no risk?
Well, 2 reasons. One is, yes, we agree upon we agree to buy a piece from a broker at a certain price and yield.
Because it's simultaneous.
And once they do that, their word is their
There's
bond.
no space in between for anything.
Well, actually, things might settle the next day or the day after that. But once we've agreed on them that we'll buy this piece at that price, their word is their bond. And if they came back to us and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I can't sell that to you at that price, even though I said I would," that would be the last time we do business with them. But the real risk is a transactional risk, which is that you'd wire them the money and then not get the security. Yes. And that doesn't happen under the standard operating procedure called DVP, or delivery versus payment.
So in support of the safety objective, in addition to mitigating credit risk, we mitigate interest rate risk by balancing maturities of longer-term securities with short-term investments like our LAIF money market account, which earn a lower rate of interest. This allows us to avoid selling securities prior to maturity, which would result in a loss of interest income. In addition to the safety objective, next in priority order comes liquidity, attention to liquidity. And the policy states that the portfolio must be sufficiently liquid to enable the city to meet all operating requirements. Again, this is achieved by balancing the amount that we park in short-term investments with the long-term investments to ensure that we have enough cash on a daily basis to meet our operating needs. After the objectives of safety and liquidity have been met, third, we look at yield, and that's the policy states that the portfolio should attain a fair rate of return relative to the low level of risk assumed in the first two objectives, and we do this by measuring the average portfolio yield compared to the benchmarks of the LAIF quarterly rate as well as the 3-month T-bill and 5-month T-note, U.S. Treasury note, ensuring that we are at or above one or all three of those benchmarks. In addition to setting out investment objectives, the policy sets out standards of care for staff to follow, the first being the prudent investor standards, so that staff will act with skill, prudence, and diligence to ensure the investment objectives specified for the overall portfolio. It outlines ethical behavior as well as the avoidance of conflicts of interest, and states specifically that staff will refrain from doing personal business with any of the brokers or any other personal business that conflicts with the investment program. There are also internal controls spelled out in the policy to prevent the loss of public funds from fraud or error, any misrepresentation or unfavorable changes in financial markets. And lastly, it specifies the delegation of authority that Mr. Pearson referred to, in that the authority to invest the city portfolio is formally delegated by council on an annual basis to the city treasurer. And the management responsibility and oversight for the overall investment program is delegated to the finance director, with daily investment activity accomplished by the treasury manager. The next slide shows the permitted investments under the investment policy, and I won't go through all of them, but it's a nice summary of the permitted investment types under our policy, which again is in some cases more restrictive than state law in terms of the type of investment or the percentage of any one security class that can be held in our portfolio. It also shows the maximum maturity that Mr. Pearson referred to and the minimum bond rating from the agencies, if applicable. As the committee knows, the bulk of our portfolio is held in federal agencies, the third line listed up on the table, and that includes investments like Freddie Mac, Ginnie Mae, as well as our cash being held, the bulk of our cash being held in the local agency investment fund to be able to meet our daily cash needs.
Jill, we don't have a copy of that. Can I get a copy?
I would be happy to forward a copy of that
That's
to
a
you.
useful
it's a
chart
nice,
to just
summary.
have. Thanks.
Before you leave, I was wondering to what extent, if any, do you have automatic checkpoints or set points in this program, so that if, for example, operating cash is getting lower, that you are notified by computer rather than having to go through all these accounts day by day? Do you have warning flags that go up in the system?
In that we do a daily balancing of cash and look on a weekly basis what our cash needs are for the week, and balance that with the maturities, any maturities and calls
Right, that's where
that
I'm-
come in.
yeah.
And so we wouldn't invest more than we would need over the next month or so, balance that with what would be maturing or potentially could be called in the next month or so. So we monitor that constantly. There's no alert other than every morning the first thing I do is come in and look at the cash balance.
And that could include, for example, payments on capital projects?
Yes, yes. Payments on capital, and we keep a fair amount in LAIF in order to be able to pull down on any given day by 10 a.m. Any cash needs for the checks that are going out. And there's good communication with our department in terms of anticipating any big claims that could be going through AP.
Okay, thanks.
The policy also sets out reporting requirements to the legislative body. In addition, it specifies that we must report to City Council monthly and quarterly, but as the committee knows, we also bring that in advance of going to the full City Council, bring that to Finance Committee for review monthly. We provide a summary of all securities in the portfolio, a list of the investment transactions during the months, including the buys, the sells, the calls and maturities, and the market value of the portfolio. On a quarterly basis, at each quarter end, we do an extended or a more elaborate presentation, which includes all the elements of the monthly report, being the summary of all the securities and the transactions, as well as the market value. We also report on the market yield of the overall portfolio and provide a narrative presentation of any noteworthy items, changes in financial or economic market conditions, possible future changes, and any investment strategies we have in the short or long term. And I'll be coming back to you at the end of this month with the June 30th quarter report. And so we'll be getting that soon. The investment portfolio is also available on the City of Santa Barbara's website if anyone would like to log on and take a look at the elements in that monthly report. Now, each year, staff updates the policy for legislative changes that would impact the policy, and I'm happy to report that there were no legislative changes in the past year requiring us to update or change our policy. There were two minor changes that staff recommends, and that's to provide clarification to the types of permitted investments, but not a change in the type of permitted investments. These are summarized on the overhead as well as on page 2 of the Finance Committee agenda report. The first change adds the words notes or other forms of indebtedness to clarify the debt issued by the city that can be held by the investment portfolio, and that includes the airport note for $7.3 million that we talked about when I gave my last report, and the council or the committee asked for additional information on that, and that is a 20-year note that begins today and has an interest rate of 7%. And so by special action of the council, we could extend the length of that note or type of security under state law. And so this just provides more clarification that since the airport note is not a bond, we added that language in. The second change is to the section of permitted investments headed State of California and local agency obligations, and we just qualified that these are notes for investment from either the State of California or other local agencies by adding the words other than those issued by the city or operated by a department, board, agency, or authority of the city. Of course, we didn't, for the airport note, go out to the bond rating agencies and get any type of rating. We have faith that that's a good investment, and we know it's a good investment. So this just clarifies in our policy.
The only thing that occurred to me, Jill, on the first item there, dealing with bonds issued by the city, why did you choose to revise that this year instead of last year or the year before? Or, I mean,
this situation hadn't come up before. It just came up recently after the policy was adopted last year.
Because.
Yes.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if I might, because I was the one that brought the airport. Yeah, I was the one that did it. I was the one that brought the airport note forward, and I think that before we did that, obviously, and recommended that to you, we obviously made sure that the city attorney's office was on board with that and felt that that was within both the state investment code and the city's investment policy. And the conclusion that the attorney's office reached was that, yes, it's both of those things. It's permitted under state investment code and under the city's investment policy. I think what the change we're recommending here is more one of clarification than anything. It's just, for future reference, obviously, if we thought that a change in the city's investment policy was required prior to recommending to you the airport promissory note, we would have done those two things simultaneously. We did not think that that was necessary at the time based on both our own analysis in the finance department with support from the city attorney's office on that interpretation. But I think at this point it probably is wise to be more specific in the wording.
I think you're right. Is it not the case that other jurisdictions such as ours have gone down that path before?
Oh, absolutely.
And so, in a sense, it hasn't come to us previously, but it's here now.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
That's absolutely right.
So it's not really creating new ground.
No, it is not.
Ms. Falcone?
Thank you. Notes, I guess, if you are very familiar with them, you understand the different categories of it. And you may have said this before, and I may have missed it. It's entirely possible. But is this a promissory note? Is this, what kind of note is this? A note of indebtedness, I understand, but
Right.
could you get a little bit just more definitionally specific about?
Certainly. I mean, the airport one that we did is specifically a promissory note.
It is a promissory note.
That's correct.
Are there other specific types of notes?
Yeah,
that
generally,
can
an
be
investment, generally, bond, note, and bill refer to investments of different maturity ranges. So, for example, usually a bill, like a treasury bill, is 90 days or 180 days, certainly less than a year. And a note is generally considered to be within the 1 to 5 year range of maturity when issued. And a bond is generally a longer term instrument. And so when we issue bonds, for instance, when we, the city, issue bonds, like our airport bond, it's a 30-year bond. It's 30 years. It's a bond. If we were to borrow money for a year, it would probably be called a note because of the time and element involved. So in investing generally, it connotes different maturity lengths.
Okay.
But for the airport one, we called it a promissory note because, frankly, it was an internal city transaction.
Does it have a 5-year term on it?
No, it does not. It has
Okay.
a 20-year term.
Okay.
And because of that, as Ms. Tora mentioned, because the state investing code limits our investments to 5 years unless the governing body approves of the purchase or acquisition of a longer term at least 90 days prior to doing so.
So this is a note because it's internally done, but it's
Yes.
behaving like a bond.
That's correct.
Thank you.
So beyond these two minor clarification changes, there are no other changes, and I'm happy to answer any questions. The process would be for you to recommend approval or any changes to the policy before it's forwarded to council.
I think
next
we
week.
pretty well asked our questions as we went along here. Is there a motion?
There is a motion to accept the changes,
Do I have
which
a
is what you
second?
want, right?
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you very much. Next item.
Good afternoon, members of the Finance Committee. I'm Stephen
afternoon.
Falstish, the Housing Program Supervisor. And the item before you is a request that you consider and recommend to the Redevelopment Agency and the City Council a series of actions regarding a request from the Housing Authority for $3.2 million in financing to be provided to the Artisan Court project that's going to that's proposed to be built in the 400 block of East Coda Street. It will be a 55 units of low-income housing plus 1 unit of two-bedroom manager's unit, and the 55 units are small. They're 406 square feet each. This is in the property that's occupied by the Hagen Printing right now, across the street from the Transition House Mom's property. That's the next item on your agenda. And the Housing Authority bought and land banked that site in 2006, and at that time the agency board approved a loan of $2 million. and that's in addition to the $3.2 million that are being requested now. And then the balance of the purchase price was $2.75 million, and that was carried by financed by a loan from Santa Barbara Bank and Trust. So of the $3.2 million in new city and agency loans, $1.2 million will be used to subsidize the project development costs, and the remaining $2 million will be used toward retiring the existing Santa Barbara Bank and Trust bank loans so that there's no debt on the property. The target population will be a combination of low-income downtown workers, youth who are transitioning out of foster care and are at risk of homelessness, and persons who are chronically homeless or who are at risk of homelessness. The Housing Authority has applied for low-income housing tax credits through the state, and that will be the major source of funding for the project. In fact, of the $12.6 million in construction costs, that excludes the land and a developer fee, of the $12.6 million, $11.4 million would be a cash infusion from the sale of the low-income housing tax credits. So you can see how important of a source that is. And of course, our financing and any action that council and agency board take would be contingent upon them actually receiving the financing, the approval of the low-income housing tax credits. So the total financing, including the $2 million that we approved a few years ago, is $5.2 million. And that represents a subsidy of approximately $93,000 per affordable unit, which is quite reasonable and in line with other financing and subsidy amounts that we've given in recent projects. So the terms of the loans, well, first, the sorts of the loans, as is indicated in your staff report, there will be $915,000 in federal home investment partnership program called Home Funds, and then also the agency would approve another $2,284,583 of redevelopment agency housing set-aside funds. And the reason we're splitting
a little bit about the home funds.
Yes,
which pot does that come out of in the government? And
home funds are a government program that are administered through the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. And every year we get a letter from HUD that tells the city of Santa Barbara what our allocation of home funds will be. We're called an entitlement community, and communities of a certain size throughout the country get a certain amount of money each year. And I believe that ours was, what, 800, and I've forgotten how much, about $800,000, I think. 10% of that can go toward the administration of the program, and 15% has to go to community development housing organizations such as People's Self-Help Housing and things like that. So there's strict deadlines on the commitment and expenditure of the funds, and that this will represent an opportunity to the city to use these funds well within the program guidelines in a timely manner. And
in terms of meeting the deadlines, is that an issue as far as permitting and construction and things like that?
Well, it can be with certain projects. This project is great because it's very timely. It has all of its development approvals, and they're pretty much ready to break ground in around November, I believe. So there's usually we have to commit our funds with home funds within 2 years of the date of the letter that tells us that they're coming, and we have to have expended all of those funds within 5 years. And in this case, there's no problem at all with those deadlines.
So have we already done our, and pardon me, maybe I should know this, but I don't, have we already done our soils reports and things of that nature that could impact the timing on the project?
I didn't hear what kind of...
Soils reports.
Soils reports, yes. Yes, all of the environmental reviews, the soils reports, and all of that are ready. And I should say that Skip Szymanski and Rob Fredericks, who are officials in the City Housing Authority, are here to answer any specific questions that I can't. But I know that all of those reports and studies and environmental reviews have been completed, and the project is very high in the readiness category.
Okay.
So in terms of the terms of the loan, The loans will bear 3% interest. They will be made not to the housing authority, but to a limited partnership established for the purpose of this project and for the purpose of qualifying for tax credits. The limited partnership will be called Artisan Court Limited Partnership. There'll be a similar one for the MOMS project that you'll be hearing about. There was a similar one for the the Mental Health Association across the street, and for the El Carrillo project, and things, and lots of projects. It's just the legal form that has to be created for the tax credits.
On the subordination aspect of it, I'm looking at paragraph D. Can you review that a little bit, how the subordination works?
Well, the Federal Home Program has a regulatory agreement that they want to control the project, and it's required through all the legal requirements that this be recorded in very high positions. So any existing financing on the property, like the city's $2 million of acquisition, we would have to sign an agreement saying that our rights are subordinate to the rights of the federal government in enforcing its home restrictions. So if, for instance, they said the project was in default and they're taking over the project, which would be a very, very unlikely scenario, but if they did, then we would be at risk of losing our $2 million and that. So it's kind of like going into a second trustee position on a single-family house or something, but here it's there are very good legal reasons for doing it. The other subordination that we'll have to do is be subordinate to the construction lender during the construction of the project, and that's also very, very common. They want to be able to take over the project and finish it, and not have to pay off other loans if there's some big problem during construction.
Okay, Ms. Falcone?
Just on the LLC or LP or whatever that's it, the entity you're creating is, in that there are a lot of these around. Are the agencies or members of the limited partnership public record in that this is essentially a public project or public monies? Because usually in a limited partnership, the general partner is noted, but the limited partners are not. So how does that work if people are curious as to who's involved in this project or any other project for that matter? Because the limited partners are not hidden, but they're not public. But this is public money, so...
Well, it's
How's that
true.
work?
It's public money, and I know there are partnership agreements that have to be recorded. Frank Thompson knows more about tax credits and the partnerships involved than any other 5 people in the city, I think. But
We have little
Rob
Rob
Fredericks
coming up.
probably has the answer to this question, so I'll... Okay.
Frank can correct me if I'm wrong. So, good afternoon. The limited partnership is filed with the state, as all limited partnerships are, and on the filing statement, it does have the general partner members. And locally, the general partners of Artisan Court LP is the Garden Court Inc. 501c3 that's also a general partner in the El Carrillo project, and the other general partner is Hearthstone Foundation out of Newport Beach, and they're a long-standing nonprofit developer of housing, and we brought them in for experience points. But also the limited partnership agreement is recorded with the whole project, so you'll see that
It is,
all
so it's
the members-
available information.
Yes.
Okay, thanks, Rob.
Okay. So the loan is 3% interest, but the payments are only due on a residual receipt basis. Again, this is a typical situation with our affordable housing loans, meaning that no payments are due unless there's positive cash flow after the payment of operating expenses and that. If there is a balance due after 60 years, it's due and payable at that time, and the loans will be secured by trust deeds against the property. After the construction period, we're in very good security position because the amount that comes from the tax credit is cash from the investors. It's not recorded as a trust deed against the property. It's not borrowed money. It's cash, and so there's a great equity position, and we'll have just a $5.2 million in financing against the property that's worth 4 or 5 times more than that, whatever. So the only thing is that during the construction phase, our loans would not be fully secured, because so if anything went wrong during that period, the bank could step in and that. But the main thing that we look for in these situations is the experience of the developer, the track record, and with the loans before us today, we certainly have a good nonprofits that are with a great track record. So that gives us cause for good assurance in this situation. The final item is the 2006 agency loan agreement, that $2 million. We are asking for revisions to those terms of that loan so that they all become in conformance with the new $3.2 million in terms of when the due date is and all of the terms. Also to change the borrower from the Housing Authority to the Artisan Court Limited Partnership, and also to approve the subordination of that to the tax credit requirements in the construction loan. So that's my staff presentation. As I mentioned, the Housing Authority is here for any questions or presentation if they want. And that's
Okay, committee
That's it.
members?
Anyone want to speak? No.
Is there any public comment? You didn't get any slips?
No.
Yep, I guess there's somebody wants to.
Please.
Skip Samansky from the Housing Authority, City of Santa Barbara. First, we'd like to thank you for considering this, the loan for Artisan Court. The Housing Authority will be the developer for this project. So aside from the tax credit limited partnership, the Housing Authority is pretty much in full control of the development through that process. And the developer fee, there will be a developer fee, and anything that comes in through that will go to further the Housing Authority's mission of providing affordable housing. But this project is one that we're anxious to get started. We should hear on September 10th if we're awarded the tax credits, and we're looking forward to the project. Okay?
What is your expectation on the tax credit award? Is it 100%?
I would say it's probably about 95%.
Okay.
We feel we have a very good project, but with the economy being what it is, the general economy, there's more people going in for tax credits, more competition. But
What would happen if that award didn't happen or happened later? What would that do to the progress here?
It would delay the project. The cash influx is from the tax credits. So if in fact we did not get the tax credits, there is no alternative source at this point. I wouldn't see the Housing Authority making an attempt at carrying the project, so it would be delayed.
One other question, which may not be in your area. In the event of problems with construction itself, what sort of recourse do we have?
Problems in construction, I have to check my age here. I have probably 35 to 40 years experience in construction. The Housing Authority has a very strong background for construction and development, so we don't anticipate problems. However, if there are tax credit projects are required to be fully bonded, we would have a bonded general contractor. So in the event of a default by the general contractor, there would be finances back up.
I realize that the experience may not lead you to think that way, but these are different times than we've had in the last 30 years. So that's why I asked the question.
Yes, there will be, the project will be bonded, the general contractor will be bonded.
Fine. Further questions? Falcone.
Questions and comments, or just questions?
Either way.
All right. Thank you. Question about the subsidy. You said it equates to $93,000 per unit. Do you recall, either one of you, what it was for the El Carrillo project? Because it's a similar density, 62 units per acre. Is that it? No. What is the density? 54 units per acre? Rob? El Carrillo. It's 122, and this one is proposed at, did I read 62? Okay. Okay, all right. Does anybody recall what it was for St. Vincent's? I'm just trying to get a scale of what our subsidies for these various projects are.
Right. The St. Vincent's property was about $120,000 per unit, I think.
Was it?
Yeah, I think across
But
the
bigger
street was
units and-
definitely above, more than $100,000 per unit.
Mental
Those were
health?
bigger, yes, for the Mental Health Association. Some of it has to do with what other sources of financing are available and the cost of the land and things like that as well.
Sure, this is the RDA subsidy we're talking about.
Right.
Yeah, not what it costs to build a project. Okay,
Right.
just trying to get an idea of, in the scheme of things, where are we and how much more expensive is it to house various different populations, and just doing things with our eyes open, that's all, just with knowledge. I've been fully in support of this project. I have absolutely no qualms with this one, and you'll hear me say similar things about the next one, I'm sure. But the piece of this that I find so above and beyond what we've done before, but so critical in its service level, is to house the teens that are coming out of foster care. That has been an enormous gaping hole in our quite extensive service panoply of offerings that we have in this community. But this is the first project that I'm aware of. I mean, I know about Noah's Anchorage. This is my former world. I used to work with these kids, this population exactly, in Massachusetts. And to get them housing, as opposed to just dropping through the cracks and ending up on the street, and then you get the little gangs of what we refer to as, displaced youth, I think is absolutely golden. And I would like to see more services provided to that population, because if you want to do preventative service, if you want to really get to some of the roots of the problems, you've got to put a net under these kids. They've got no other net. So this is absolutely critical, and I would be supportive in the future of more services that really address this population in particular. So thank you so much for doing this in the other areas as well. So thanks.
Ms. Schneider.
Thank you. And I don't know if these questions are for Skip or for Rob, but first off, I want to commend the Housing Authority for keeping Hagen Printing there, not only to have an active business still be on the property as opposed to vacant square footage, but you also got quite a bit of lease payments over the last few years, and from what I can read here, to the tune of, by the time we're done with this, about $750,000 worth. That's reducing the debt of purchasing the property, which is $750,000 of RDA money that you don't need to ask us for or to get extra tax credits for. And I think that's a good model on a good neighbors relations, good, keep local business there and keep the lease going, and then also reducing the actual cost by having that revenue side come in. So that, to me, I thought worked very well. And I remember when we were looking at this property with the city and the Housing Authority before, knowing it was going to take a few years to figure out exactly what we wanted to do with the property and go through the permitting process and the design and review process, that I thought that was a very smart way to go, and something I think we should keep in mind as we look at other properties and land banks and so forth, as opposed to clearing everybody out and wait until we're ready to break ground, because for a lot of reasons there are places around town where we've seen that, and that creates blight and other concerns that we have. So I just want to put a big plug into that. I want to echo Councilmember Falcone's excitement and support about the foster care transitional age youth being part of the program. Can you reiterate the full scope of who is, in terms of right now, the mix of residents there? Because that's one of 3, I think, different mixes in this particular project. If you could comment on that.
Yes. I want to make sure it's understood that the tax credit application that we went in for was for studio units, and that would give us the flexibility to serve who we could best serve in the community. But we would be looking, and again, the numbers may change, but a portion, maybe 15 units allocated for the youth, another 15 for special needs, and then perhaps the balance of downtown workers. But that's in flux. It depends on how we can get the support services, and we are already in negotiations with trying to get those support services for the youth. And yes, that is a critical component. It is the Housing Authority's mission to provide a full service, so to speak, so that we're not just providing boxes for people to go sleep in. We want to be able to accommodate with the services and a beautiful residence.
Yeah.
So the mix may change, but that's...
So similar to El Carrillo, where it's the Housing Authority overseeing the housing management of it, you contract with another agency for the social services piece to it. Now, the El Carrillo, it's PathPoint, and here you haven't finalized that yet, but you're still in the process of negotiations. Is that what I heard you say?
That is correct.
And then I guess a question, I don't know if it's to the Housing Authority or to staff or our City Attorney's Office, in terms of the conditions of approval of this kind of funding and subsidy. I mean, let me preface by saying I have no doubts that the Housing Authority is going to continue working for low income and the housing needs of this community, and that's not where I'm headed. I guess it's just the question of part of what I think excites us and others about this particular project has to do with that combination of both transitional age youth and foster care and special needs, which could also include homeless seniors or chronically homeless people or something like that, some combination of that. And I guess in terms of the language of the loan coming, want to make sure there's a connection to that service demographic that links to this particular project. And I just want to make sure that all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed on that kind of, on those issues there.
Well, Mr. Chair and Council Member Schneider, the City Council and the agency board can put conditions on the project about the target occupancy, and typically we talk with the applicant about that, and sometimes give our input and direction, and the council's input and direction about what's most important. The way that occupancy would be assured would be through conditions in our affordability covenant and in our loan agreements. And so it would be up to this committee and the council and agency board to set priorities and see if that would work with the goals of this project and the ability
and what's
to get
before us here fits, right? The language or whatever it is that we would need is
right.
Yeah.
This is very general, but additional conditions on it would be reflected in the not only in the conditions of approval, but specifically in the loan agreements and affordability conditions.
And I think it's our intent. I don't want to put an exact number that has to be for foster care youth forevermore, because if you put in the number 15 and you only had 14, or what if you needed 16? I mean, there's obviously flexibility there, but in terms of the general sense of which populations are to be served by this project based on the funding that's coming from the redevelopment agency, I just want to make sure that all that language is where it needs to be, and what I'm hearing is yes, it is. Yes, it's there.
We don't have the covenant or the loan agreements drafted at this point. We usually, but once those are, that will be the controlling documents.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that was clear. And Sarah Connect is nodding her head there. Great. No, I'm again very excited to see this project go forward. Good luck on the 10th of September, and want to commend you while I have the mic about the recent Huell-Hauser California Communities show on KCET that showed El Carrillo, and maybe Huell will come back to do one in a year or two about this one, and because it'll be another great model for our area in terms of meeting the needs of local people who fallen through the safety net. So thank you very much.
Ms. Oakley?
Just a little bit more on that, because this population of 18-year-old youth who are getting kicked out, if you will, of foster care or any other sort of provided care by the city or the state, well, the state, they are by definition people with no family. By definition, they're in foster care. If they had family of any sort, they'd be with that family very likely. There are some extenuating circumstances sometimes, but they are by definition without family. Therefore, more than any other population, in my opinion, the community are these kids' family. We have an obligation that we haven't fulfilled to provide services for this population in particular, and I will put them at the head of my priority. So whatever can be done to provide for this population, I think we must. Now, whether it's NOAA's or it's somebody else, NOAA's Anchorage, or somebody else, is irrelevant to me. Who we find, we need to make this work. And I think that the more of this population that we can serve, the better we are as a community, because this is the population we have yet to take care of in any meaningful way. We've dotted around the edges, because in that this is one of my fields, my first field of professional endeavor, crisis counseling. When I first moved to Santa Barbara, I looked around to go back to that job, to go back to that profession, and couldn't find much of anything at all. Now, that was 17 years ago, and things may have changed. I don't think so. I've been paying attention, sort of. So I can't tell you strongly enough how I feel about this, but I think maybe you got it. Maybe I've been clear enough. So please make that a priority in this project. I really think it's really critical, because that's where you stop the chronic homelessness. That's where you stop the people who cycle in and out of jail. That's where you stop the gangs that start getting created. That's where you stop a lot of this. So there's my spiel. Thank you.
Okay. Further staff reports? Further questions from council?
We have one more item, right? But I'll move this one over to City Council.
I'll second it.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Next item.
Good afternoon, members of the Finance Committee. Oh, is this on? Yes. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'm Simon Kiefer. I'm the project planner, and I have a request here from Transition House for a home loan of $680,000. This is for a project that's going to be right across the street from Artisan Court, which you just heard. There are lots of similarities in the projects, and there are a few little different wrinkles in the financing. Transition House is planning to construct a brand new mixed-use building. It will be eight rental housing units for homeless families, and then that will be over an infant care center on the ground floor. We have existing financing on the property. There are 2 agency loans, and the terms of those loans will need to be amended. And we are facing a tight August 30th deadline that HUD has set for committing these home funds. So briefly, background on Transition House. They provided food, shelter, and support services for homeless families for the last 25 years. In 1992, they acquired a warehouse at 434 East Ortega Street and converted that to a shelter. In 1999, they acquired the adjacent property, the mom's property. And if you look at attachment 3 in your package there, you can see how the properties are there adjacent. So for the last 10 years, they've been working to create a cohesive campus that serves the needs of homeless families. The Moms Project is the last stage of that campus. And to date, we've provided, the agency has provided an acquisition loan of $320,000 and a pre-development loan of $120,000. So Transition House acquired the property in 1999. There are two buildings on the property. One is the Mom's Restaurant, and Transition House will be demolishing this building. They'll be building 8 new residential units above the ground floor infant care center. And this will be housing for families, homeless families. These are people that are Transition House clientele. They're people that have been in their shelter. They've maybe gone through the transitional housing that they have, and now they're graduating to permanent housing. This is, again, the third stage in their continuum. The Cordover Center building, this is an existing mixed-use building. It's a modern building. We have, on the ground floor, we've got Transition House offices and program space, and then above that we have 8 existing units. And over the last 10 years, Transition House has been moving their clients in as vacancies arose in this building. So what they plan to do here in the Cordover Center building is put on a new roof, do some rehab, and then create a bridge that connects this building to the new building. The total project will be 16 units. Rents will range from $437 to $1,050 per month. And we are looking at a tenant income targeting to low and very low income people. So we're looking at targets of 25%, 50%, and 60% of AMI, which is very low. This is certainly reflective of the clientele of Transition House, and it's also a requirement of the funding sources, the tax credits and the state supportive housing program. The development team, again, like with Artisan Court, we have a limited partnership. This is a requirement for getting the tax credits. The general partners will be the Santa Barbara Housing Assistance Corporation and Garden Court. These are familiar partners for us. These are people that were involved with both El Carrillo and Garden Court. Transition House will retain ownership of the land and then ground lease the property to Mom's LP. Mom's LP will acquire the existing buildings on the site, and they will then own the new building that's constructed. Transition House will have an option in year 15 to acquire the buildings and terminate the ground lease. The Housing Authority is assisting the project. They'll be managing the construction. And Artisan Court and Mom's share the same architects, and that's Christine Perrone and Mark Weinke. And Frank Thompson is the financial consultant for the Mom's project. So what's all this going to cost? If you look at attachment 3, we've got that itemized. It's going to be about $8 million, mostly in the new construction category. The original financing in the property, that was an acquisition of $3 million back in 1999. The agency provided a loan of $320,000. They got a first trustee loan from Santa Barbara Bank and Trust for $727,000, which they subsequently refinanced. And then they managed to raise $2 million in their own fundraising to acquire the property. So that's remarkable. The new construction, during the construction phase, then the key piece to that will be the bridge loan from Montecito Bank and Trust. That's $3,475,000. So that figure is correct in the attachment. There's an incorrect number in the body of the report. So the correct number is $3,475,000. This will be in first position. This will be a 6% loan. It'll have a term of 2 years. And this loan will be used to pay off the existing Santa Barbara Bank and Trust loan and to pay for the construction. So then all of the city and agency loans, the 3 loans there, will be in effectively second position. So then looking at the permanent funding sources, the critical piece here is, again, the tax credits, like in the Artisan Court project. This is such a great program. It's this huge infusion of cash. There's no debt on title. And what they'll do here is they'll pay off the Montecito Bank and Trust bridge loan with the tax credit proceeds. In first position, then, will be the State Supportive Housing Program. And this is a new bond-funded program. It'll have a 55-year loan, and it's the same program that MHA will be receiving funds for across the street. And then all of the city and agency loans will then be in second position. The proposed home loan, again, it's a typical loan that we provide. It'll have a term of 60 years, 3% interest. It'll be repaid on a residual receipts basis, which means that to the extent there's positive cash flow on the project, we'll get repaid.
Just before you leave that, so the home loan would be the same response pretty much that we had on the previous project in terms of percentage of possibility you may get it or may not get it, or
Well, the tax credits
Yeah,
are in the
tax
same
credits,
category,
yeah.
yes. The home funds are definitely guaranteed. We've got them.
but the tax
The
credits.
tax credits, they're in the same competitive round.
So that's just have to wait and see. Huh?
We'll have to wait and see. That we'll be hearing in September.
Okay.
But we feel this project is very competitive.
Simon? Sorry, Roger?
Go ahead.
Thank you. The tax credits appear at different levels of subordination or credit position in the construction funding and in the permanent funding. Is that because they are two separate programs, or is it because construction funding sits differently than permanent funding? And why is it sitting in a second position if in the permanent funding it sits in zero position? Because
Okay.
there's no debt on title.
This is just a listing of the funding sources. It isn't necessarily in
But-
priority order
But
on title.
tax credits is not above the MBPT bridge loan as it is in permanent funding, above the state supportive housing.
Again, this isn't order of recordation on title. It's just a
It's
listing of the financing. I've got a listing of
Okay, you can get me that after. This is not
recordation on title.
recordation on title, and it's just sort of randomly put, okay. Never
Frank,
mind.
did you want
Thank
to approach the mic?
It's good that these two projects went on the same day. This one is a little bit different in that. Thanks, Stephen. This one is a little bit different in that the income targeting is potentially maybe a little bit lower, at least. At any event, what was important here is that we would have on the residential units no conventional financing at all to pay. And that's why in this case the state is probably going to ask for first deed of trust position. But again, we'd work this out with the state, negotiate with them. The city could either take its liens one after another, which would essentially be a second, or possibly we'll wrap them into a new deed of trust so that you'll have a second. But during the construction period, before the tax credits have been paid in and before the state financing comes, because the state is just permanent financing, not for construction, then we had to go to one of our community banks. We were very grateful to have the support of Montecito Bank and Trust. And of course, that is conventional financing that needs to be paid currently, and that they required a first trust deed at that time. Okay.
That helps. Thank you.
Okay, so then on the two existing loans, we will need to do a few things here. We will need to authorize assignment of those loans from Transition House to Moms LP. We'd like to make the terms consistent with that of the new home loan that we'll be providing. And then we would also have the same kind of subordination situation that we discussed with Artisan Court. We'd have to subordinate our loans to the bridge loan, to the HCD supportive housing loan, and to the regulatory agreements of both the tax credits and the HCD supportive housing program. Our covenant on the property would also have to be subordinated to those to the same financing and regulatory agreements. We're in a similar security situation as we are with Artisan Court during construction, and actually a very similar position after construction. The city loans, agency loans, will be second only to the $1 million HCD loan, so we'll be in excellent security position at that point. The total amount of subsidy comes to $1,120,000. So if you divide that out by 16 units, that's $70,000 per unit. But if you maybe separate it a little bit, if you look at the first subsidy that we gave for acquisition, that would be $40,000 per unit 10 years ago. And then if you look at the new construction, we're looking at about $100,000 per unit for the new units that we're producing. So that's all very consistent with the projects that we're seeing now. And actually, it's a little lower than, say, MHA and St. Vincent's.
Couple couple of questions, and maybe you're going to get
Yeah,
to it.
I think I'm done. So,
Okay.
so go ahead.
Under the permanent funding sources,
Yes.
the seller carryback and the deferred development fee,
Yes.
how does that work?
Okay, so Transition House will be receiving funds from Moms LP for acquisition of the existing buildings on the property. And so part of that acquisition will be held by Transition House. They're going to hold, they're not going to require I'm going to let Frank explain this one, because
I'm happy to help. Actually, Simon has done a great job. Thanks. I'll get it yet. You'll train me. Thanks. I appreciate that. I need all the training I can get. This is it is relatively complicated, this one, in the sense that when we had the appraisal done on the property, there's obviously significant value that has built up that attributes to the land. So, and I thought you were going to mention this because Simon made the point earlier that the acquisition in 1999 was for $3 million, and the appraisal now is nearly $7 million. So, most of that increase is attributable to land, not to the buildings. The buildings are $2,550,000, and what we wanted to do is keep that value out of the partnership. We want it to stay in Transition House. And this goes with the fact that 15 years, as Simon said as well, Transition House has the ability to buy back the property and combine the fee and get rid of the partnership and also get rid of the ground lease. So we've tried to simplify it as much as possible by Transition House offering carryback financing to moms. We keep it all within familiar agencies, and we don't have to go to outside banks or outside investors to make that financing.
So, may I?
So they're financing their own purchase, basically.
Okay, through the equity that has built up in the property,
Correct.
they're able to collateralize the loan. Is that what you're doing?
You've got it.
Yeah,
That's
okay.
exactly right. Great.
Okay. Further questions? Motions?
Well, I'll be happy to make a motion to assign the current loan to moms. That's the direction you want to go, right? Approve the funding for the proposed new home loan, amend the 99 acquisition loan, and subordinate the loans to the state of California.
Second.
From the state of
Second.
California.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion carries.
And I just want to say, how fitting is it to have an infant child care place in a place known as Moms?
That's fantastic. Kathleen wants to say a few words.
I just wanted to make a couple of quick comments. First of all, this project is competitive for the 9% tax credits, although its readiness factor is not as high as the housing authorities. And so our plan B, if we are not able to get the 9%, is to go to the 4%, which are non-competitive, and then we would have to do some fundraising, I think, in the community to make up the difference. But our original plan was with 4% tax credits, but 9% because of the economic climate and some other factors all of a sudden became attractive for this project. And in order to do this, we had to put together our tax credit application about 4 or 5 weeks with still materials that are outstanding that'll go to the state by middle of August. And it's meant pushing city staff in planning and in housing to do a lot of things for us very quickly to get this done. And they've been fantastic. Simon's been great. City planning and Stephen, city planning staff has been phenomenal in helping us with this and really realizing that this is an opportunity for the whole community to get several $1 million into Santa Barbara to do this good work. So thank you to all of you for everything. I really appreciate it. And then I also wanted to mention about the service comments that you made regarding the foster youth. Transition House's current Cordova Center houses our homelessness prevention program. We have a 14-station computer lab there. We have night classes in what we call Job Club. It's career development, English as a second language, parenting, money management workshops, and other offerings. So the clientele that are in Artisan Court could take advantage of that. depending on which clientele in Artisan Court that we're talking about, they may need case management services that would come from another entity, not us. But there are services across the street in the homelessness prevention category that I think would be phenomenal for foster youth, because that's really what we're talking about.
Well, yeah, I mean, the net that I was talking about that we need to provide under these kids has to do with job training. It has to do with maybe social service kinds of counseling, because by definition they have no families.
Right.
The access, helping them get access to job training or skills through trades unions. You know, the electricians, the pipe fitters, they all have trade schools. You have to get kids to them. So thank you. Because that just adds to the panoply of services that we can cobble together to help
and
out.
It makes total sense to start at that level, because if we don't get them as soon as they become emancipated, they ended up in transition house 2 years later. So it makes a lot of sense. And then finally, thank you, Roger, for your encouragement and continued support on the Infant Care Center. We are doing everything we can to squeeze every inch out of that property to take care of as many babies as possible.
I certainly hope we can make that work.
We're going to make it work. Absolutely. So thank you.
Okay, great. If there are no further questions, then we'll adjourn the meeting.